Aloha everyone, this is Stephen Chudy coming to you from the University of Hawaii at Manoa. My topic today is project-based language learning in the context of online learning. By the end of this module, you should be able to name several key features of gold standard project-based learning, identify at least one difficulty of implementing project-based language learning, especially at the novice or intermediate level of language proficiency, briefly explain each of the named steps in a model for project-based online learning, and locate additional resources to help you get started with project design. So, project-based language learning is our topic. What is project-based learning? Project-based learning, or PBL, is impactful, inquiry-based learning that aims to motivate the learner to develop a response to a real-world problem or question, using tools ranging from scholarly inquiry to hands-on design and manufacture. It's characterized by cross-disciplinary learning and an emphasis on high quality, referring to standards from the professional working world rather than just those developed for education. And the project needs to have impact beyond the classroom. It needs to reach a specified public audience. Typically, project-based learning is cross-disciplinary, and the final product can take a variety of shapes. It could be a dramatic presentation. It could be a poster of the kind you see at a poster exhibition at a conference. It could be a published article. So project-based learning is defined in the professional context by the Buck Institute for Education. They have emerged as an arbiter or clearinghouse for the implementation of PBL across disciplines. So under their definition of project-based learning, there are certain essential design elements that have to figure in a project in order for it to be considered real PBL or gold standard PBL. The first is that it needs to have a driving question, that is a challenging question or problem that is from the real world. So that's a question for which there's no ready answer. You wouldn't be able to Google the answer, for example. And so that challenging question or problem creates a need to know in the learner. And that need to know forms the basis that drives the learning. Students also need to be allowed some agency, which is called voice and choice in their own learning. Group work is typical, and reflection on learning is frequent. Curricular design is centered around the creation of a high-quality public product, which is collaboratively created and extensively critiqued and revised, that may be subjected to critiquing standards drawn from the relevant professional contexts. The product must have impact beyond the classroom. And the purpose needs to be authentic, not concocted. So in the domain of language teaching, that means that we have to have authenticity of language and culture as well. Project-based learning theory and practice still await full development in the field of world languages. So getting from project-based learning, or PBL, to project-based language learning, or PBLL, presents some challenges for which there are no ready-made solutions. Each project design requires separate creative design and thought. In most projects designed in disciplines other than world languages, there's considerable cross-disciplinary sharing and melding of subject matter. The single uniting factor in those cases is the learner's ease of use of their first language to engage in deep inquiry. This creates somewhat of a barrier between world languages and other fields when it comes to PBL, particularly because a project designer in PBLL has to consider not only the subject matter in the project, which, remember, should have real-world significance and impact, but also the language functions that are involved in the project, So designing a project is of necessity a dialogic process in which the designer will first check out the scope of possible language use by examining the ACTFL world readiness standards, trying to match those to the initial project idea, to reshape the project idea to better fit the range of the target standards, check back to see if the redesign might have eliminated or recaptured any standards, and so forth. And then once a group of standards has been selected, then the designer should start thinking of specific assessments during and at the end of the project that fit into the project work and also match each standard. These assessments must fit into the framework of the driving question and not lose connection with the overall impact of the project, the idea of making a difference that lies at the heart of a PBL project. In this backward design process, the designed assessments then form the backbone of the instructional design as the designer creates activities that develop the learner's ability to perform the assessments. If all of these are well aligned, then the project proceeds more or less smoothly through the assessment events to the ultimate assessment event, which is the presentation of the product to a public audience, which is supposed to be a non-negotiable element of a PBL project. Usually, the most helpful point of focus here is culture. Differences between cultural groups or between the same group across historical time or across geography in a diaspora, for example, all of these can be rich sources of inspiration in designing a project. PBLL challenges the educator to scaffold instruction at the novice and intermediate levels in a way that facilitates in-depth inquiry by learners who have little functional communicative capacity in the target language. This is a particular challenge in view of the requirement that learners create a significant response to a challenging question or problem. There are three strategies that have potential use to address this challenge, namely, formulate a driving question that is appropriate to the proficiency level, but still has real-world relevance. Scaffold and shelter students' use of language so that they experience success. And reframe the concept of basic language to strengthen focus on collaborative classroom interaction and work routines in the classroom. I'm going to explain each one of these a little bit more. Okay, so when we talk about formulating a driving question that is appropriate to the proficiency level, but still has real-world relevance, let's look at the novice level and the kinds of things that novices typically do. So for example, in novice level lessons, we might typically have, who am I, who are you, which is basic facts about oneself and about another person. And we need to take that and reframe it as a cultural inquiry. For example, absolute beginner learners could start out with a project to answer the question, what is most important to know about another person? In this project, with the teacher's help, they would first create a limited set of basic yes-no questions that can be asked about a person, perhaps 8 questions. Then they would create a survey to administer to different groups of people in the target language, to ask those people to rank the importance of those questions. For example, they could administer the survey to speakers of the target language who have never lived abroad, and to speakers of the target language currently living abroad, and then examine differences in the survey results between the two populations. All this could only take place with strong scaffolding from the instructor, of course. Presumably, the public product would be an infographic, which the students would publish to the web, or ideally to native-speaking students in a classroom with whom their teacher has established a tandem relationship. Regarding scaffolding and sheltering students' use of language so that they experience success, this is one of the biggest challenge areas in project-based language learning. It's much more difficult to imagine a way to create a framing, comprehensible story for learners that will help them understand the challenging question or problem than it is to simply use the target language and, use the learner's L1 and just explain the purpose of the project. However, if you can succeed in creating a comprehensible story, you'll probably good. As an entry event for what is most important to know about another person, for example, a teacher could create a simple illustrated story about people from different cultures getting to know each other, in which each one asks a question which feels culturally inappropriate to the others. This would lead naturally to the driving question of what is most important to know about another person, and might point the way to a project product that is focused on cultural differences. Finally, regarding changes in this concept of basic language, what is basic language? PBLL would necessitate a shift in the instructional target construct away from the language that you might use if you were going to visit France someday to the language that you need to use right now to work through pieces of the project. So language about working together or about interviewing informants becomes very important, and learner use of this kind of language can be supported through the use of various kinds of scaffolding, including cheat sheets that help structure learner interactions. So one example is the interpersonal Spanish playbook that you can find on the web. All right. When it comes to undertaking project-based language learning in the online instructional context, there are certain contradictions that must be resolved. First of all, the concept of online instruction as a means for scaling instruction across large populations of learners stands in contradiction to carrying out a unique project, which is independently designed. Therefore, curricular material that is widely shared and copied, such as a language textbook, must be considered in light of its potential contribution to the project, and only projects that share fundamental common needs, such as the skill of conducting an interview, would be able to share curricula effectively. PBL is not scalable in the same sense that a typical unified curriculum is, because each project has a product that is addressed to a specific audience. One could not have thousands of learners all working on the same project and creating the same product for the same audience without some kind of radical reconception. Therefore, unity of curriculum becomes an impossibility and undesirable unless all of the sharers are working on a larger project and each is contributing a piece of that project. In an online instructional context, it's likely that sharing of the public product would take place online as well, unless there was a structure to the public product that would allow the learners in their respective locations to share the product with some local audience separately by face-to-face means, or the public product might be a distributable product, such as student-published books. So all of these factors must be taken into consideration when approaching the decision of whether to go PBL or not. PBL must mesh effectively with the instructional ecosystem, or else have a special space carved out for it within a non-PBL ecosystem. So what I've presented so far may have caused those of you who are looking forward to doing PBLL online a certain degree of despair, but fear not, you're not alone, and there are PBL enthusiasts in the online teaching community, albeit there hasn't been that much focus on the world languages domain as of yet in the field of PBL in general. With reference to PBL Online, online teachers at Gwinnett Online Campus in Georgia have developed a model for project-based online learning. And the steps are visible here in this graphic. The main steps are At the beginning, much as I mentioned, you want to have a hook or what we call an entry event, which could be a story that gets the learners interested and motivated and helps them understand what the driving question is. And then once that has been done, then you would proceed to introduce the project and to go over with the students the need to knows. What are the things that we're going to need to know in order to accomplish this project? So that is what is meant in this graphic by build content knowledge. So in this PBOL model, the students build their knowledge through a series of tutorials by example. And this is an iterative part of this design in each stage of which the students view a rubric and a sample, and then they are taken through evaluation by an authority, and then evaluation by peers. So evaluation is sort of scaled away from the teacher as they go. And then this tutorial by example stage of the project would probably cycle several times because the project will have different pieces that need to be completed. Finally, there is a summative assessment, and then the product is shared. Now, this deserves more examination, and so I have given you a link here in the slides, and in the lesson materials, that link will be available for you to follow and examine this project-based online learning model a little bit more closely. So for language learners, teachers online who are interested in developing a project, and actually those who don't teach online, if you're interested in working with PBLL, these are some other resources for you to consider. The first and maybe most important is the Buck Institute for Education website, which does require a sign up, but a lot of the resources are free. That can help you understand more about what PBL really is all about. And the Resource Center are products that we developed here at NFLRC for participants in our other professional development events connected with project-based learning. The first one is a project blueprint template. So I'd like to offer the caution that the institute, the online institute with which this was connected, is over. So in the template, you might see some prompts that have to do with participating in the institute. You can just ignore those. The next item is the Project Blueprint Assessment Rubric. So that rubric was designed to evaluate a finished blueprint, a blueprint for a project. So you would first work on a blueprint for a project, then you can use the assessment rubric to check the quality of your plan, your blueprint. Finally, the last bullet takes you to an online repository of project-based language learning project designs that have been developed by your peers, teachers, not all of whom work online. In fact, most of them don't, but could be a rich source for you when you're thinking about ideas for projects to develop on your own. The next things that you should do once you've finished listening to this presentation are, please check the Dig Deeper section in the TED-Ed lesson, ponder over the reflection questions that I'm offering to you in the TED-Ed lesson and discuss them with your peers, and engage with your mentor to make your plans, to dip your toe in the ocean of possibilities in project-based language learning. Thank you very much for your attention. Thanks to the Actual Distance Learning SIG and to the National Foreign Language Resource Center at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. And with that, I bid you a fond aloha. Feel free to write to me if you have questions.